This episode of Android Faithful is brought to you by Awesome. The Awesome privacy cable gives you much needed control over when and how your data is shared. Get more info at awesomeprivacy.com/privacy-cable.
Welcome to Android Faithful, your weekly source for the latest news, hardware, and apps for the wide and wonderful world of Android. I'm Huyen Tue Dao.
And I am Ron Richards.
And I'm Mishaal Rahman.
And we are very lucky this week to welcome a very special guest, Mr. Chet Haase. Hey, Chet.
Hey, everybody.
Chet, why don't you, Chet is on the Android graphics team at Google, but you've worn many hats. So I don't know. I can't remember which exact hat you're wearing this time, but why don't you let people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, as a good example of that hat switching, I'm actually on the toolkit team
Shoot,
now.
dang it.
Again. So I've kind of, you would think I've kind of circled around, but I think of it more as like I took my career in a particular direction. Now I basically backed it off another 10 years. So I started out on Android in 2010 as an engineer on the toolkit team. I eventually led that team. I went to DevRel, and then I came back to engineering onto the graphics team as an engineer, and now I'm back on the toolkit team as an engineer. So yeah, I rewound it all.
I feel like that speaks in the pre-show. Wynn was sharing some memories of giving talks and referencing some of Chet's talks at Google I/O and other events. And the more things change, the more things stay the same. Life is very cyclical, right? That theme. So
it is. I mean, there's an aspect. I don't know what you have found in your engineering careers, but there's an aspect of we tend to work on the same kind of things over and over again. I've written at least 3 animation frameworks, for example. And I work on graphics and UI and performance, and I just keep doing that. It's like, different variations of the same stuff, because that's what we enjoy. That's where you build your skills. And so you just kind of dig into that hole and you keep going down.
I will share that. I'm not as talented as you both are on the engineering side of things, but I've got, 20 years under my belt on the product management side. And I seem to have fallen into content management systems. I don't I did one CMS when I was 21, and then every job since is always the first project has been the CMS, and it's hard to shake the things that you do. So
yes, yeah. So good luck finding things that you enjoy working on, because you're going to do that again. And so if you pick a bad one the first time out, it could be a hard life.
Yeah. So the sky's the limit, but watch that first job, because then your sky will actually kind of start to get very, very narrow.
We're all sort of different paths here. Like for me, change is a constant, because I'm constantly going back and forth trying to keep up with whatever y'all are doing on Android. Like 20 different teams, thousands of employees, trying to figure out what you guys are working on, and explaining it is just a never-ending battle.
Yeah.
We try to make it interesting for you. So,
well, and there's no one better than Chet, who literally wrote the book on it.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
Ooh, hey, there's a plug. Look at that.
Yeah. So everybody definitely needs to check out Chet's book, Androids, the team that built the Android operating system. Chet, on our former show, we talked to you right when the book came out. How's the reception been since it's out in the world? So
it's good. It's had 2 or 3 lives so far. So I originally wanted to find like a publisher, and I don't know for anybody listening if you've tried that, but try to find a publisher. Publishers are like, no, we don't want to hear from you. Go to an agent. You try to find an agent, and the agent basically doesn't respond. And eventually I'm like, I think this is an interesting story. I'll just self-publish it because I want people to read it. And then once it was out there, it was actually doing pretty well. And it was a little easier to approach a small publisher at that time, No Starch Press. And so a second edition of it came out. Same book, minor stylistic tweaks to it. But that edition is doing well. And then there's also the audio book, which I'm doing through a different publisher, through Tantor. So hopefully people can find this thing and get it where they need it, and learn the story. I wanted to tell it because I thought it was interesting. So I hope everyone agrees.
We agree.
We are the Android faithful, so we definitely agree.
Speaking of the Android faithful, this is our brand new podcast. You might have remembered us from a slightly different podcast where we did have Chet Haase on last year to talk about his book and pepper him with questions about it. If you happen to be listening on the live stream, maybe you haven't subscribed yet, so make sure you go to your favorite podcatcher, whether that's Pocket Cast, Spotify, Apple, and subscribe, or just go to androidfaithful.com and just see anything else that you need, any of the information you need to help subscribe and listen to us every week. If you feel the need or to support us, or you really like what we're doing, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/AndroidFaithful, where you can get in on things like our Patreon news pick of the week, an ad-free version of the podcast, and exclusive content and merch. And finally, if you are a social networking type of person, you can find us on Twitter/X/whatever that site's called now at Android Faithful. We're also on less volatilely named things like Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. And we love hearing from our listeners. So you're always able to write us emails at contact@androidfaithful.com.
Right on. All right, so what do you say? Do you want to get into it?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right, let's do some news. Huyen, you got the first story.
Yeah,
That's a
so
biggie, right?
this is an interesting one. Get your drinks ready for your drinking game, because yet again this week we got a story about AI. And in fact, we have a story about AI and Google Assistant. So Axios got their hands or their eyeballs on an internal email sent to Google employees, and it confirms more or less what we've been speculating on from kind of like corollary news, that Assistant is going to get an overhaul focusing on generative AI technologies, Bard, Chat GPT, have your drink. And this will, of course, fundamentally change, many different things for many different people, the developers working on it, the consumers like us, and of course for Google employees themselves, and I guess other third-party devs as well. The changes will start with mobile versions. And, we previously talked about shifts in the executive leadership, and in the email, which was signed by Google Assistant VP Piyush Ranjan and Director of Product Duke Dukelis. They basically confirmed like some more team organization, and unfortunately some small layoffs that will kind of, be around that reorganization. And Axios, if you're really curious, has the full text of this email in their article. And of course, not surprising given how much we talk about generative AI these days, and how other assistants and competitors like Alexa are similarly kind of trying to integrate generative AI into their assistants. So we surprised? Not surprised? Makes sense?
I'm not surprised. I mean, I don't know. I think it makes sense. Mishaal, you probably got a POV on this. What do you think?
No, I mean, absolutely. Like, it's something that's long overdue. I think everyone has had some kind of complaint with the way Google Assistant has not become as smart as we thought it would be in the future. Like maybe 5 years ago, we all thought we'd be using Google Assistant for everything. Nowadays, I use it for timers, for checking the weather, for maybe hearing the news in the morning. It's not what we thought it would be when it was first unveiled. But with using Bard as like a backend, maybe it could evolve into what we originally thought it would be. And I definitely am excited to see what kind of how exactly we'll be interacting with Assistant in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain degree, I'm having lots of conversations in my day job about generative AI and AI as a tool set, and like there's lots of concern, and obviously we're seeing AI in the news, specifically in the entertainment industry, as it's a big sticking point in the writer strike and the actor strike currently going on in Hollywood, where they're concerned about the use of AI and what that means for their roles. And so it's kind of like we when you joke about like take a drink because it's so buzzwordy and it's so buzzy in terms of what's going on, but it really is the direction of everything. Like, is there anything technology based that doesn't have some AI component that we've heard like it to help do what it's doing or anything like that? It seems like everything is going in this direction. So by that logic, this isn't surprising. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still kind of skeptical for various reasons, whether that's the economic impacts and like ethics/economic impacts, like things like the writer strike, things like gosh, I can't remember, stability AI and things like of learning off of other artist sets, and then also just like the day-to-day questions of AI is having hallucinations or being slightly off, and like the impacts of whether kind of I guess lay people or non-technical people being exposed to when information is not accurate, but is said with a lot of confidence, as generative AI does.
What is that term? Is it the AI
hallucinations? Yeah.
Oh my God, they're so
AI
funny. They're very like when the AI is convinced it's giving you the right answer and it couldn't be more wrong. And we've talked about that on our previous show, and like we talked about in the past. I mean, like I cited the example of I asked Chat GPT to write an article about one of my other podcasts, and it went through and did this whole very accurate 12-paragraph article about me and my other podcasters until it took a left turn at paragraph number 8, where it went on about how one of my co-hosts had cancer and podcast through his cancer treatment and documented it. And He never had cancer. So and we found the spot. ChatGPT found a podcast listing page with our podcast, and on the side was a recommended podcast about someone with the same name as my co-host who survived cancer, and it just combined the two and made it fact. And so these are just like, it's all technology is going to have kinks. I'm not necessarily pro or anti-AI. I just think it's inevitable. I don't know.
But doesn't this just mean that AI and computers are just getting closer to human because now they can just make mistakes?
That's a very good point.
It just used to be so dry with like fact. Oh, tired of all the facts. Just make some stuff up and pretend it's real. Keep
it interesting, right? Like it's keep people on their toes.
So it is so funny because my husband and I just watched Blade Runner 2049 finally this weekend, and not to spoil that for anyone who hasn't seen it.
I've yet to see it.
I won't spoil it. But I think not to get too highfalutin with it, but obviously like there was there's a whole question of like AI and how human AI is, and I suppose maybe we're already kind of there because exactly, what's more human than being wrong? So maybe they're ahead of the curve on us. But
there's a lot of talk about the downsides of AI, and obviously there's going to be a lot of work to be done to rein in. I think there was a recent announcement about a lot of companies are adding metadata to images that are being generated by AI so that you can identify them. But I also like how AI is going to make a lot of these previous technologies a lot more accessible to the user. So going back to the Google Assistant story, one of the problems with using Google Assistant or any voice assistant right now is that you kind of have to understand how it works to be able to formulate a query that it'll actually understand and process. So like my parents right now, they try to talk to it, but they don't really understand the right way to say something to where it'll actually respond properly. Like whereas like I know what I want to say beforehand, whereas they constantly have pauses, they might say something incorrect and it's just not able to search up and get the right answer for that. But with the large language model, it'd be much more likely to actually pick up on what they're trying to say and generate some kind of answer that's useful to them. Well, of course, there's a lot of concerns around that, but I think this is one area that would be really helpful.
Well, I will make one comment and then we'll move on. But in terms of assistant, Lord, things can't get much worse. I kind of want to set up hidden cameras and record my wife trying to talk to the Google Home and get pull the song up that she wants and see how many times she walks away in frustration. So maybe this will help to, to your point, Mishaal, get that, get it kind of a little more push in the right direction. But we'll see. All right, well, moving on. One thing on the show that we do like is numbers. And looking at the smartphone sales by share by company in Q2 2023, things aren't looking too great right now for the industry. Smartphone shipments fell 24% year over year compared to 2022, with specific declines across pretty much every manufacturer except for Google, although that is deceiving in and of itself. Samsung and Motorola and Alcatel saw pretty steep declines in shipments. Apple was only down about 6%. But Google was technically up 48% because their market share in Q2 2023 was 3%, whereas a year ago it was only 1%. But if you actually look at the breakout by quarters, Google's market share was 5% in Q4 2022, and they're down 2% there in that regard. So, even though inflation seems to be going down, job market is up, people seem to be on pause on their upgrade path for whatever reason. And we might get into that when we start talking during the hardware section about Samsung, but like at least in this past quarter, not a lot of reason to upgrade smartphones. And it looks like the biggest kind of the biggest winner in the quarter was Google, probably thanks to the Pixel Fold coming out on the market, which is a very high price point as well, as wind shows are off. But we do love the numbers. So
I think it was actually the 7A because the Fold came out like a few days before they stopped collecting data.
Oh, okay.
Do Fold devices get double counted because there's two screens on them? At least
actually, it's more like three devices, isn't it? Because there's like 1, 2, and then you have another one, you have 3. So triple.
So there you go. There are some numbers to keep track of what's going on. I don't know. I mean, like whenever we do these sort of numbers, it's always interesting to see what the market share looks like and see what the industry, the industry kind of looks like. I'm not surprised to hear a pause in purchasing despite inflation going down, because there's still lingering effects of inflation. And say like, just because prices aren't going up currently, you're still dealing with the fact that they went up the previous quarter and you're still saving your pennies and waiting to pull the trigger. So,
I'm looking at all these reports like over the last couple of months that, iPhone keeps gaining ground among young people in the US, in Seoul, in Korea, and around the world. And I'm wondering, like, what can Google as the maker of Android do to, reverse this trend? And one thing that always comes to my mind is, support an ecosystem that allows users to, makes it harder for users to switch over. Because that's something I think Apple does exceptionally well. Their Apple Watch is only usable if you have an iPhone. If you have an iPhone, you have AirDrop, and that's only usable between Apple devices. Then you have all the integrations with MacBook and so on. And so, I think, I recently started to think that perhaps maybe the Nearby team at Google is one of the most important things they're doing right now. Like all the initiatives they're doing to make Android devices work more seamlessly and kind of helping Android OEMs build an ecosystem that they may not be able to build on their own, or supplant, making them work everything better together. So even if you have one Android phone from one manufacturer, if you have a Windows PC from some other manufacturer, you're not just completely isolated from one another. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Chet? How do you feel about? I know you can't say much, but what do you think can be done to draw users back to the Android side of things?
Yeah, I think I'm going to leave this one to the product people, because there's a reason I'm in engineering and not product.
Which is fair, which is a fair response.
I've always thought that I would have made an excellent marketing person for a company that wanted to fail. So yeah, I think I'll just step quickly back from this one and go,
Yeah, we'll see. Important to note also that those numbers are worldwide numbers too. So that's not necessarily what's happening. That's also effects of Asia and that sort of thing too. So, all right. Well, moving right along, Mishaal, you and I were talking earlier, and I dismissed this story, but you said it was actually pretty big. So what's the story here?
All right. So there are two aspects of this story. The first thing is what's rolling out starting today. It's the unknown tracker alerts feature that Google announced at I/O. So for those of you who don't know, when Apple released the AirTag, they kind of unleashed, a menace onto the world. People started buying them and putting them on people to stalk them and, figure out where they're going without their consent. So now, finally, if you have an Android phone, you'll be able to detect when an AirTag is on your person, an unwanted AirTag. And so, you don't have to worry about someone stalking you without your knowledge. Because previously, you have to download an app that was made by Apple, but that app would only allow you to manually scan for AirTags. So it kind of made it useless. But now this is built into Google Play services. It's rolling out to everyone on Android 6.0 and later. So all you have to do is just have an Android phone in your pocket, and you'll detect when an AirTag is nearby, an unwanted AirTag is going along with you. And I think you do have to turn it on in settings. You have to go to settings, safety and emergency, and turn it on there. But this feature definitely is something you should turn on if you're at all concerned about someone stalking you, which, you don't know it's the problem until it happens.
I don't know. I'm sorry, too many jokes to be made there. I'm sorry, keep going.
The second big announcement is a little more unfortunate. It's the fact that Google is delaying the rollout of its Find My Device network, which was also announced at I/O. So this network would have enabled the hundreds of millions of Android devices to turn into, a location tracking network for one another. So those of you familiar with AirTags, how they work, and with iPhones, it basically would have done the same thing, but for the Android side of things. And a lot of tracker manufacturers were planning to release products that were compatible with the Find My Device network. But because Google is delaying the rollout of this network, they're not able to release their product. And if you're wondering why is Google delaying the release of the Find My Device network, the reason they're citing is because Apple has yet to roll out unwanted tracker alerts on iOS. And because of that, if Google were to release Find My Device network right now and the tag manufacturers were to release their products onto the market, then you would have a situation where these new trackers would be able to track iPhone users, but iPhone users wouldn't have any way to detect that they're being tracked. So Google doesn't want to release, this new product onto the market and open up potential iPhone users, to being stalked. It's kind of protecting iPhone users.
It's a real Star Trek needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few solution there, isn't it? There's corporate responsibility for you if everybody's questioning that, so
it's Google's really put in a tough spot here because, Apple did this, they released AirTags pretty much without having any tracking capabilities, and they didn't really do anything for Android users until much later, and the app they gave is just half-baked. So like Apple clearly didn't really care about the safety of Android users at all, but Google is doing the responsible thing and saying, we don't want Apple users to be hurt by the release of this this product, this feature. So now it's up to Apple. Like, does Apple, Apple is working on it, but the way Google released their Find My Device network is they said that they used a custom implementation that was not based on the jointly developed specification that Apple and Google worked on. That's what enabled them to roll this out much more quickly, or have them be ready much more quickly. But Apple is supposedly working on their own implementation of unwanted tracker alerts that is based on the joint specification. And hopefully once that is released, then Google can release their Find My Device network. That's the assumption right now. We don't know exactly how Apple will respond. Will they slow walk it? Will they actually release it shortly after the specification is finalized? Google's really in a bind here, unfortunately.
Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see how it all plays out, right? This is an area of the world that I just don't, I understand the importance of it, that people use it. I'm not buying AirTags. I'm not buying any trackers. I don't use trackers. This is that's why when Michelle's like, oh, it's a pretty important story, I'm like, I don't care, but I see why some people would care, and it does make sense for them.
Yeah, and like a bunch of Android-based OEMs are releasing their trackers. So if anything, it's important to get all this, security and privacy, 2023, important stuff.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so now it's time for our patron pick. So every week we put up for our patrons 3 news stories, and y'all patrons, our lovely, lovely patrons, have until 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on our show day to vote. And the winner is what I like to call an OEM drama story. So on YouTube, there's this concept of YouTube drama where YouTube creators make videos where they clap at each other or call each other out. And I think it's fair to say that smartphone OEMs, and for sure Android OEMs, have their own OEM drama. So we've covered a little bit of this with RCS drama with Google using a Drake song to call out iPhone for RCS. Actually last year, Samsung started a little OEM drama with iPhone 14 before it was released. And now in your latest episode of OEM drama, basically as soon as Samsung Unpack started, OnePlus released a tweet which said something like, "We open when others fold." A little bit, it kind of feels a little bit shady. Not shady as in cunning or sneaky, but just a little bit of shade thrown their way. And this obviously, other than just being kind of a fun poke at a competitor, seems to substantiate some rumors that OnePlus's entry into the foldable arena will be coming soon and will be called the OnePlus Open. If you want a quick rundown of stats on what that is rumored to be, it's a passport book style foldable like the Z Fold. It's slightly larger than the Z Fold inner screen at 7.8 to the Z Fold 7.6, but usual specs you might expect in 2023, 2K 120 hertz inner screen, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with 16 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage, and a 4800 milliamp battery versus the 4400 on the Z Fold 5? Well, Z Fold 5 or 4. Take that. And also, they're probably planning to ship the first half of August, which is super interesting because that's when the Z Fold 5 and Flip 5 will hit shelves. So there's your OEM drama patron picked for this week. Yeah. There you go.
And look at that wordplay in the slogan there, in the tweet or whatever it was. Oh,
Open
wow.
versus Z Fold.
I was going to say, Chet, as someone who's on the sidelines watching all this stuff, when brands snipe at one another, is that welcome or is it cringe? Because I trust your humor standpoint. It's got to be good, right? It's got to be a good swipe if they're going to take it.
You're assuming that I actually notice these things, which I tend to not, unless it's some big marketing campaign that gets in my face somewhere. But I don't know. It's it's a little bit fun to see humans at work behind the corporations. Which is what I think of when you see sort of, clever wordplay or attempts at clever wordplay. So can be fun.
I guess we're going to get to this for the Samsung Unpacked, but they actually had some wordplay where they kind of talked about funding innovations as being Nope, but then Nope, they rearranged Nope to being open. Flip side, Flips open.
Save it. We're going to talk about it after the sponsor.
Spoilers, my bad.
Well, that's coming up next. So coming up next is hardware. But first, we're going to pause and we are going to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is the fine, awesome folks at Awesome and the Awesome Privacy Cable. So if you haven't heard about the awesome privacy cable before, it gives you much needed control over when and how your data is shared. It's got a built-in switch that cuts off the USB pin and delivers USB data. So there's no software that could get broken into, just a simple, straightforward air gap solution. And I've actually got the cable right here. And we've talked about it before in the past couple of weeks. If you've been watching or listening to the show, you've heard me kind of rave about it, but it's got that fantastic physical tactile switch right there on there. It's got a great little LED plug-in, LED light on there, so you know when you're plugged in that it is enabled. And what it does is it protects you when you do plug in your device into a USB-C connection. The LED flashes when data might be transmitted when the switch is enabled, and it gives you an early heads up when a connected device is doing more than you expect. The cable's got a durable design with abrasion-resistant braided nylon sleeve and anodized aluminum end caps. And the switch, like I said, feels so satisfying and tactile when I do flip it. It supports up to 60-watt charging speeds and USB 2.0 data speeds. And if you are carrying sensitive data, if you're worried about people snooping in at what you have on your device, or just generally if you want to protect yourself when plugging in your device into a strange place, you want to use the Awesome Privacy Cable. You can go to awesomeprivacy.com/privacy-cable, or go to Amazon where you can pick it up for just $30. And we want to thank the fine folks for Awesome. They've been so supportive of this show, and they're going to continue to be. We're really excited to be working with them. So check it out, awesomeprivacy.com/privacy-cable. And we thank them for their support of Android Faithful. And with that, we are going to talk about hardware, because it was a big week last week. And I feel like I've been talking about Samsung Galaxy Unpacked for like a month already. And Huyen, you've got to feel worse because you've done multiple shows on it now at this point. But
it's okay, because I think it's actually pretty exciting. And I'm not just saying that just to say that. So yeah, Samsung Unpacked happened last week. Of course, on Wednesday, they need to get the message that we're on Tuesday. So if they could just, fit our schedule a little better, that'd be great. So Samsung Unpacked was in fact in Seoul, Korea this year. And unsurprisingly, kind of like the big star of the event was, of course, their flippables and foldables, the announcement of the Z Fold 5 and the Z Flip 5. And I mean, it's about as Samsung can get. Of course, being in Seoul, they had access to all of the K-pop stars that you could want. In fact, BTS's Suga was kind of highlighted, quite a bit in some of the, promotional materials. But yeah, the stars of the show.
Hang on. So that's not the first time I've heard that, and I don't know I don't know anything about.
I'm sorry. So BTS it is behind the stage, but BTS is like the number one K-pop band ever. So it would be like for us, I don't know, having Taylor Swift come and sell the Pixel Fold. So it's like
just to give you an idea,
yeah.
Just based on the rumor that one of the BTS members would be there was a pile of fans lined up right outside of the entrance.
Yeah,
crazy.
Just because of a rumor that he would be there.
Yeah.
Yes. Also, our host network, Daily Tech News Show, Tom's Merritt knows an obscene amount about K-pop, by the way.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that. Eileen is a big fan.
Surprised. Okay, so that makes sense. But yeah, so Z Fold 5, Z Flip 5, and of course, another fairly big and interesting announcement was the Watch 6 series with both the classic, with the return of the rotating bezel, as well as kind of like a standard line. A lot of emphasis on, a lot of emphasis on health, welfare, and lifestyle attached to the watch. This really felt like, from the announcement, they were trying to present this like holistic, very Apple Watchy experience where they want the watch to be not just a thing that sits on your wrist, maybe count steps, maybe sometimes you listen to your podcast. It's meant to be, a companion for your life and your lifestyle and your health, with, all the bibs and bobs like ECG, blood pressure, and all that stuff. And of course, less seeming fanfare, at least from the live stream side, for the S9 series, which of course is like the base, the plus, and the ultra, and kind of across the board. I think all the hardware was good, but it seems like a dot release, like more iterative, like just a little bit of bumps everywhere. Same thing with the tablet line, although there is something interesting in that the tunable things. One which we noted last week with Max Weinbach is that the base, all of the models have OLED, and they are now all dust and water resistant. So if you were waiting for a Samsung tablet and really wanted something dust and water resistant, this is your year. But I mean, I think generally the hardware bump ups were interesting. And it's more like the software experience side that sold it. But that's enough for me. I think we honestly should toss to Mishaal, because Mishaal, I think you had a much better experience than I did watching the Samsung Galaxy Unpacked VOD.
Yeah, so the reason I was out last week was because I was actually in Seoul to go to Unpacked. Thanks for Samsung for inviting me, by the way. Yeah, it was a very, very, very cool experience to be in Seoul. I think it was their first Unpacked held in their home country, which is surprising because, you know, Samsung is they're a namesake in Korea. They're one of the biggest companies in the entire country. And as you mentioned, Win, like the focus of the event wasn't really on most of the other devices. It was on the Flip. Like the tagline for the event was "Join the Flip side." Flip was all over the marketing. They took over like an entire street and like had like these Flip decorations. They were like handing them out to users to test them out on the street and everything. So yeah, definitely the highlight of the event was the Z Flip 5 because of that big cover screen. That was the biggest change hardware-wise in the new device. But yeah, Unpacked was as you'd expected. If you saw the live stream and you saw everything they announced, there was not really much to say about the announcement itself, other than yeah, it was cool to be there in person.
I was gonna say, I mean, after watching it and when your comments and Mishaal, your thing, like I feel like this is the same event they put on a year or two ago, just with just swap out the hardware. Like it's the ecosystem, it's the watch, it's the what made this one different, Mishaal, and being in the audience.
Well, the difference is that because it's in Korea,
BTS,
we're able
right?
to. Well, no, besides that, but
K-pop.
because we're in Korea, we're actually able to see more from Samsung. Like being in San Francisco, all you have is the event, and that's it.
Why
But
did they roll?
being
Did they
in
roll out
Seoul,
washing machines and stoves?
For a lot of the,
I'll take one.
For a lot of the media, we got to visit the flagship store in Samsung in Gangnam, which is like a 3-story tall, like it's a massive place. Like it's like the Google store in New York, but even bigger than that. They have like a whole store full of every single flip and fold device, like all the colors, combinations, the cases, the wacky stuff, the merchandise you can't get in the US, like a Pokeball themed Galaxy Buds case. I really want to buy some of that stuff there, but unfortunately they weren't on sale at the actual store. We also got to visit the Samsung Smart City, which is like located 3 hours outside of Seoul in a city called Gumi. And this is where they actually manufacture a lot of the devices. So like we saw a Galaxy S23 Ultra being created from like beginning to end through the entire assembly. And like they also showed off like they had fully automated that whole process. I think they're almost completely done automating that entire line. And like there's so many cool things we got to see at this factory that you really don't see how complex a smartphone is until you actually take it apart and look at all these tiny components, right? All you see is the end product, like this Galaxy Z Fold 5 that flips open, but you have no idea how many parts go into the hinge, the display, how much testing is done, the constant folding and unfolding. Like they have a machine where it's like temperature controlled at 35 degrees centigrade, and then like they constantly change the temperature, and then they fold and unfold constantly to test how the durability of the hinge differs with the temperature. They have this robot where it's moving back and forth on a line, constantly vibrating to simulate you walking with your phone in your pocket. They have a robot with 2 arms that's just basically pumping iron all the time to test like wrist gesture detection with watches. So much crazy stuff at like their automation lab, their manufacturing line. It was a wild experience.
How much do you think is actually in use or just put on for the show to show you all that?
I could definitely believe that they're all actually using this. Like the amount of changes that Samsung makes to Android and is able to push out, within only a couple of months after Google releases every release. Like it's staggering how much they have to test and how much they have to constantly iterate on, and how many phones they release and how many different markets. It's an immense operation.
So, Chet, I would love to hear what your take on the foldable revolution is, because like the Samsung built this whole presentation around the fold and the flip and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, we've seen Google come out with the Pixel Fold. Like we're seeing more foldable. Motorola's got another Razr coming. There are more foldables coming out. As from your perspective, I don't know. Do you use a foldable? Have you played with one? Like, what is your impressions of them?
I do not right now. I'm currently rocking a Pixel 7 because I like that form factor. The thing that I'm trying to figure out is like, how do we get the perfect screen size that is as big as I want to see it when I'm watching stuff, but small enough that I can reach my thumb across the screen to tap that button without dropping the phone, right?
Yeah.
And I think the foldables are helping because now they can make it a little bit smaller. On the other hand, it got thicker at the same time, thicker and heavier. I'm really interested. Actually, I was going to ask Mishaal what the big push was with the flip, because that to me, I wonder if that's sort of a future of some of this stuff where they know that everybody wants something smaller in their pocket, but bigger to watch, right? So does the flip form factor give you that? So I was curious, like in the big push that they had, I haven't looked into these new devices. Was it about, hey, now the tech is finally here and everybody should get one? Or was it more a marketing thing, just go and everybody should get one?
I definitely think that the vision that Samsung has for the future is that there's going to be two classes of devices. There's going to be the flip for the everyday user that's going to replace the traditional candy bar phones that we have now, and the super premium high-end fold devices that are for, business people, journalists, people who need to multitask, because the average user is not going to be opening two apps side by side, pasting links from one email to another, right? They're just going to be casually browsing their phone on X, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, etc. So I think that's why they're pushing the marketing so hard on the flip, because it's their most affordable one, and I think it has the most potential to break into the mainstream. So that's why they're going so hard with all the customization, all the things you could do with it, the price, the changes.
Well, yeah. And not to continue the play on words as we go through, but the flip is fun, right? Like they're showing, they're showing how you can take selfies with it. You can, like, it's leaning into the fun aspect of the foldable. There's the world of Fs now that we're in. But yeah.
So I think what's super interesting is and this is so lately we've seen a couple of foldables, like the evolution of the clamshell flippable foldable outer screen, right? So last year, with like the Oppo and the Fold 4 and a couple other ones, they're like kind of tiny, like little outer screens on the outside, right? So you could look at them and maybe like get like maybe a notification, usually the time and the weather. And then this year, with Motorola, they created a screen on the Razr Plus, which basically the entire like outer half of the clamshell is a screen, and with the cameras kind of poking out. And I think actually, friend of the show, Mr. Mobile, Michael Fisher, is he a friend of the show?
He's a friend of the show. He's
Michael Fisher, friend of the show, did a review, and he basically said this is a phone that you can use, like, and fully use, like be able to do not just like simple checking of notifications, phones and text, but you could use it as a smartphone without opening it because the screen is that significant. And I think with the Fold 5, it has a similar, very, very large screen. It isn't quite like hinged to cover as the Motorola Razr Plus is, but it's pretty damn close. Dang close. Sorry.
You can say damn. It's okay.
I can say damn. Okay.
Right.
Pretty damn close. But what actually kind of blew me away is the software. So our own Florence Ion had said last year when we were talking about foldables is that the software at this point, the hardware is kind of like cover screens notwithstanding, the software experience is what's going to sell these devices, right? Like having software devices that really kind of are couture, like I can't think of the word, like fashion to fit the form factor. And so what I really thought was compelling about the Flip 5 was the flex window, flex cam. So something that was really interesting, and I might be wrong, but this is my interpretation of it from the Galaxy Unpacked, was that their cover screen isn't just like has widgets or like usable size apps. They have this whole flex window where it's almost like Wear OS, where you can flip between tiles. And so you can very quickly switch between different functionalities, right? Different views and different widgets. And I think that lends to what Michael Fisher is kind of getting at with like, this is a phone you can just use without flipping it open. Sure. Like if you don't want a big old like Pixel Fold, I thought this is really nice, I love it, in your pocket, you can still have something that's very, very portable, still have a full-size candy bar phone. But if you just are going around and you just need to be able to do a little bit more than just checking things, you still want to have like a smartphone functionality with a hyper like portable form factor, this is kind of it. And part of that is the software experience, which throw me and other third-party devs under the bus, we haven't been doing a good job at all. And so I think what's interesting is Samsung has kind of taken the initiative, because they kind of had to, because the rest of us weren't listening, and made an OEM, they made their OEM experience really interesting with whatever's going on with that flex window. I pre-ordered one because I'm fascinated, but I think that is what's really interesting, is that not just having this like fancy cover, but having a software experience that kind of, again, makes it easy for people to have fun and be creative and do all this like fancy stuff.
So does that mean that all of the stuff happening on the outside, on the exterior screen, when it's folded down, is all Samsung stuff? Because otherwise, like if it's random app stuff, that means app developers need to be plugged into that to some extent to make sure that they have
To
the right
design the
experience there.
context,
Yeah,
right?
and
Like,
that's what I'm
yeah,
not
it's-
100p sure on. It feels
Yeah.
like almost like sorry, go ahead, Mishaal. I see you.
Yeah, it's actually, I wanted to like a way to actually frame to think of it. The way Samsung actually talked about it at the event was they described it as you're basically using it like a smartwatch. And I think that was a really good way to think of it. It's like basically a 2-inch screen that you use exactly like a smartwatch. Of course, it's not running Wear OS in any form, right? But the
right,
way
but
you
what is
use
the
it,
connection
interact
to
with
the
it,
apps? That's interesting, though.
it's
Like,
you're running
notifications.
widgets,
Yeah.
mostly
Yeah.
custom widgets and
Yeah.
like custom quick settings panel, etc. Like the way you're able to run full custom apps is you add a widget to the cover screen, and then that widget, I think you're just running apps on top of that, like an overlay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any way for the app developers to actually target the cover screen in any way. Like right now, it's all everything's provided by Samsung with an experimental setting to run apps. Obviously, a lot of apps don't properly fit a 2-inch screen.
I mean, it makes sense because they have full control over, the system UI or whatever that sort of thin wrapper widget thing is, so that they can make sure that experience is really good for the users. And maybe if things like that come online and they're really powerful, at that point, maybe there's a developer ecosystem that makes sense for apps or developers to opt into it. But come out with the experience that makes sense first, instead of just saying, here's a playground and there's going to be a bunch of random stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, I still blame the lagging of third-party developers, and I kind of understand at some point. I as much as like I think as an Android dev, if I'm like a purist and I'm like, yeah, like exactly, like it makes me feel a little icky to think that this is an OEM driven, kind of like environment, platform, cover OS, whatever you want to call it, that is a little bit, extra work, extra development time, whatever, that it's a little bit of a branch, but they needed to do it. I'm all for it as a Foldable fan.
Yeah. So, Mishaal, you
Alright.
got your hands on the Fold itself, right? Not the Flip, but the Fold. Yeah.
The Fold.
So,
And I know we're running a bit late, and I
Yeah.
do have this device on loan for a bit, so I have plenty of time to talk about this in the future. But I just want to leave y'all with like a 1-sentence review. I get it, y'all. The
Nice.
Fold. I
Joining
understand
us.
now. I understand. I'll elaborate more in the future, but I get it now.
well, no, elaborate. We got to get a little minute,
Yeah,
like,
no,
like
totally.
just from a
Yeah.
productivity standpoint, or like what,
From a
like,
productivity standpoint, I definitely
Yeah.
get it. Like, especially with the changes that Samsung made on top of Android that allow you to, freely open freeform windows, to open, 3 windows at a time, to use the S Pen, the way that's integrated into the UI to be able to handwrite and everything. Like, there's so many things that is done right on this device that I feel like it's going to ruin me if I use this for way too long, get used to all the productivity features and try to move back. Of course, like being who I am, like I have to go back to a Pixel eventually and just continuously use it. But there's going to be a lot I'm going to miss, I feel, after I'm done with this.
One of us.
the Foldable Revolution happening live on Android Faithful. I love it.
Sorry, 10 seconds. I just want to know for all my stylus fans that something I love about the Fold, like Z Fold 5, is that the pen has a little carrying nook in the case, which was like my biggest thing for dropping off S Pen last year. Anyway, but I think this goes to show that Samsung is really designing, driving, and pushing for this experience, these fold experiences. Okay, I'm done.
Cool. All right. Well, it's an exciting time, I guess, right? And when you went on Daily Tech News Show and talked to Tom and the crew about it, right? So you can go back and listen. This was recorded the day of Samsung Galaxy Unpacked. You can go to dailytechnewsshow.com and find the episode is last week, July 26th. So yeah, you can listen to more of that. And Mishaal, we'll set some time next week maybe for you to do a more deeper dive on the Fold, kind of a full review, because I think we all want to hear it now that you're converted. So that's so to speak. All right, cool. So that was our hardware section, and now we're gonna drop into apps because we've been tracking larger screens for a while now, right? And this is something that we're very interested in. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah. So as I hinted, devs have been a little bit dragging their feetses on making large screen, like really flagship, let's call them large screen experiences. And I mean, you can totally blame us. And as a third-party Android developer, I'm 100% contractually obligated to hesitate supporting large screens because of ROI, which I mentioned so many times on this show and other shows. And part of this contractual obligation is basically to whine, well, why doesn't Google show us what large screen experiences are like first? And so in response to that contractual whining that all of us third-party app devs do, we have a now large screen, tailored experience on the Google Play Store. It's starting to roll out. It's not, I checked my Pixel Fold, it's not there yet, but this is in the process of rolling out. And this is not just necessarily a Google Play. Sorry, I turned her on. Hold on a second. Go to sleep, assistant.
Oops. Hey,
Oops.
G.
Hey, this is not just a G Play, not just a G Play redesign, but also kind of a re-emphasizing within the Play Store as a market on large screens. So there is, a revamped UI. Like for example, search is now 2-pane with like your search results and an individual search result that you click on being shown in a detailed display. So again, taking up lots of the, kind of layout more appropriately. But there's also kind of other things that are more like kind of related to how an app is surfaced, how it's ranked within the Google Play Store. So basically right now, as it stands, there's better app. So as you are kind of following, if you are a app that follows the large screen guidelines, and we covered this a little bit last year in other shows about how now there's like many tiers that are basically how well you are designing your app and implementing your app to large screen experiences. So there's like tiers, right? Of like, hey, it runs fine and it's not letterbox, to, hey, you are taking advantage of large screen features and have a very rich large screen experience. So basically on how well you grade on those tiers, your app ranking within the Google Play Store and the visibility of your app within the Play Store can be affected by that. So that's kind of a big change. It was talked about last year, but this is now coming to effect where your ranking will be dependent on how well you support large screens.
And this is great because this is what we've been asking for, which is like, okay, if like Android 12 like supported, added the large screen support in Android, and now with the Pixel tablet and with the Pixel Fold, we're seeing more support of larger screens. And they got to walk the walk to a certain degree and get incentivize developers to develop for it. So
yeah, 100%. Incentivization is super important. If I go back and tell a product manager that, hey, we won't get ranked as high, or our app won't be as visible, or we're less likely to be featured as an editor's choice if we have a poopy, large screen experience, that's going to have impact. That's exactly the kind of thing that we've been fighting all these years. And as much as someone says, hey, large screen's awesome, you can do like drag and drop and all the kind of things, that's the kind of thing that, as much as any dev might wish to kind of implement these things and have a desire to implement these things, that's the kind of thing that we need to kick in the pants, that we can kick into other pants or kick other people's pants with to, I don't know. Don't kick nobody in the pants, but
let's be no violence here.
No violence, but
no kicking people.
A metaphorical kick in the pants of a kick in the product pants. There you go.
As I told my 4-year-old this morning, let's not kick other people.
Yeah. So yes, be good, like, large screen citizens, pay attention to, the guidelines, but other things like, if you're a game and you have high quality video to, demonstrate gameplay, in the new Google Play Store redesign, if you have a high quality video, it actually will become a banner video in your app listing, which is meant to kind of encourage apps or games specifically, but apps in general, to provide high quality content in their app listing. And app listings will kind of get a redesign to have more content above the fold. That wasn't a pun, above the bottom of the screen, and to be able to kind of have more of your content and more of information and visuals of your app face forward. So if you are a game and you have a high quality video, it actually become like a banner video, so you get more of like an immersive experience for users that kind of look into your app your game listing and things like that. But yeah, big redesign on the Google Play Store, both in terms of like the app itself and design, but also in how it functions, and the, again, emphasis on large screens. So yeah, and a couple of things. I guess I kind of just want to briefly mention that navigation is always a pain in the butt for devs. Always, it's like a big question, like how to implement it, how to implement well. How do we do UI? How do we do it like from a kind of abstract perspective? Something interesting is that Google Play is testing a semi-permanent bottom bar. the bottom bar. I think I ranted about it last week. But basically, just new things with the bottom bar, which shows games, apps, offers, and books kind of as the top level destinations in the Google Play Store. You might be getting that in more places in the app to kind of help you navigate a little bit better. This is kind of unique, honestly. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but the fact is, like, whenever you tap into something like, a particular app listing or a search result, you lose that top level navigation. And it seems like 9 to 5 Google found that they're kind of doing sounds like A/B testing or something with kind of making those top level destinations more visible. So lots of Google Play redesign and refactorings and different, ways of working on our horizon.
Chet, have you gotten to play with the new Pixel tablet at all there in your travels, or any tablets? How do you feel about large screens?
Good. No, I haven't actually been playing with that at all. The stuff I've been working on is more focused on sort of fundamental platform stuff, not not that stuff in particular. Some of the people on the teams I was on, though, the graphics team and the toolkit team, like, are working on, APIs to make these things better, or, making the functionality easier for devs or better for users, or, faster. There's always work, especially if you think about any of the new devices that come online, like more screens means more pixels, and, faster refresh rate means more pixels, and all of the stuff means you need to do your stuff faster to get it to the screen faster. So CPUs and GPUs are always getting faster, but not necessarily always, in lockstep with the amount of information we're trying to display. So there's always a race in particular, the teams that I tend to work on, of, just trying to like catch up or improve and get better and get the stuff to the screen faster, so that we, reduce jank, or, just make a smoother experience for users. So all of that stuff is always a race when, these new things are coming online.
Because it's all got to work in concert together, right? Like, there might be an advancement on one side of the office, but the other side's got to catch up, and vice versa, right? And so, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Because you've got super premium devices coming out, and they can do all this stuff, and they have all these, amazing capabilities with the screens. And then it's a bummer if, applications are stuttery because, whatever.
Do you think it's fair? Like, sure. Sorry.
Go ahead.
What percent do you think is worth, like, our fault versus your fault? Throw me under the bus if you want. I'm ready. Throw me under the bus.
I honestly, every performance situation is kind of its own unique thing, and it's a little hard to track down. Like, there are certainly things that, we're doing or can do at the platform level or the Android X library level, constantly looking into, how we can make stuff faster. There's also stuff that apps can do, and kind of starts with the app developers, because we can try to build general purpose libraries and platforms that, take care of everything we can imagine, but we can't imagine everything, right? We don't know how the apps are going to be using this stuff. And so finding out the best way to use it and the way to avoid the problem starts with the app developers actually profiling it, saying, hey, this thing didn't start as fast as I wanted it to, or when I flung the list, there was a little bit of jank in the middle, and, there's always a hiccup when this particular type of view comes into being. Okay, so what's going on there? Like, what is the action that triggers that? And then figuring out, okay, well, maybe it's actually app code, because, you're initializing too much stuff when you don't need to. Maybe there's something going on at the platform level, but, like, without your app, without that use case, we may not have known that. So at that point, hey, file a bug, or help us track down what's going on, because honestly, we try to create these situations internally. We're like, well, so what if somebody does this? And we have tons of benchmarks and tests that we run, and continuous integration tests, but these are based on, little unit test ideas that we have, not real world situations. So it's always really helpful when a developer says, hey, when I did this, the following thing happened, which doesn't seem right. And then we can actually, like, track that down and sort of figure out what the underlying problem was. Whether it's on the app developer side or on our side doesn't matter, but having the use case is really important.
So it's a conversation always between basically y'all and us, and trying to figure out where the problem is. Not necessarily whose fault it is, but
yeah, it can be. I'm just saying, like, if it does cross the fence, then it's really helpful to get, a bug report with enough information that we can actually reproduce the problem. Maybe the problem is all on the developer side. Like, yeah, you're just doing a whole bunch of stuff. You're uploading a bunch of stuff in the background when you're trying to, display on the UI thread or whatever it is. And hopefully it's all solvable on your side of the fence, because that's certainly easier and faster. But if it's not, if you're running into something that is clearly something that we could help out with, hey, file a bug and help us track down what the issue is.
Cool. All right. Well, not to switch gears, but Chet, I couldn't help but notice under your name you have your handle on Threads.
Yes.
So does that say more about Threads or more about what's going on the other side across the street? But how do you like Threads? Threads came on the scene like a whirlwind. What are your initial kind of thoughts of it?
It did. I like the rest of the social media universe. I think I'm trying to figure out where things are going in the future. I was happy with the social media platform that I used for many years, and there's a large community of people that are honestly probably following me because they think I'm going to talk about technical stuff, and then I drop jokes on them instead. But that that entered a period of chaos that only seems to be getting even more chaotic. And in the meantime, other things have cropped up. So I went over to Mastodon and I joined that, and I love what they're trying to do. I also feel like you kind of need to be an engineer just to join. Like when a platform says
strong barrier of entry, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's great. Please join. What server do you want? And what?
Yeah.
If you're not an engineer, what are you going to do with that question? And I am there. I do post stuff there. There seems to be less engagement. I don't know if that's a reflection of how many people are there or just the amount of engagement people are actually doing there. And then this Threads thing came online, and I have to say, like, out of the gate, it was a pretty nice experience in terms of being pretty new to the market. Obviously, it's coming from a company that's been doing stuff like this for a while. So just in terms of user experience and what they were trying to do at first, I think it's is promising. You still have the follower problem. Like, you can't magically make all the people in your community appear there.
Right.
So
Well,
we'll
they did. We talked about on the show. They did have the advantage of having a tying to your Instagram account, so at least your Instagram community could come with you if you chose to go that route.
I had two followers.
Yeah. So that there is an issue.
I had nothing.
But it's hard to argue that Threads had a ton of potential out of the gate. Now the question is, what does the longevity look like? And now here we are getting reports coming out of Meta that over half the people who signed up for Threads have stopped using it already, which I do think might be a little clickbaity as they are getting through, kind of they're drilling down into what the actual usage looks like. But there is an important note here, which is that, like, the key, and I think we all in our experience with mobile app stuff like that, the key is retention, right? So you introduce an app, you get 100 million users in the span of a week, which is just amazing and record setting. How do you keep them on the platform, right? How do you keep them coming? How do you keep them checking out? I know personally for me, for better or for worse, I spend the majority, and I might be different, Mishaal, you and I might be very different. I spend the majority of my time in front of my computer all day, not on my phone, right? So the lack of a web client for Threads is a real limiting factor for me. I would be a lot more active if it was on the web, things like that. So they definitely need to start develop, they now that they put it out there in the world, they need to kind of step up and give people reason to come back and keep using it. So I don't know. We continue to watch it. We try to talk about apps that aren't Google because it's so easy to talk about Google all the time. Here's an opportunity of like an app on the scene that's hard to ignore. But Huyen, did you have any thoughts around the Threads retention?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Like, so number one, I know they talked about retention hooks and more features, and I think what they cited was a desktop version, which drove me nuts because I don't need a desktop version. I want a web client. I don't need a desktop specific PC, Mac, whatever version. I
do though.
That's okay. If we can have both, then
but that's the thing. We can have both. Like, that was the great thing about Twitter, was that, like, you had desktop. I had TweetDeck. They took TweetDeck away from me. Then I, like, all those sort of stuff. But, like, I'm a desktop user.
But Ron, you know that the web runs on a desktop, right? Have you seen this?
I'm aware of that.
It's something that kind of struck me though. And maybe like as a group of like engineers / product people, I kind of wanted to ask about first impressions, right? Because the other site that most of us have spent time on and build a community on and we're able to discover both, new connections and new information on, like, we've built up a relationship with that, and we have like expectations of experience and functionality and things that we want to do. And then of course, I think there's like, when adopting a new thing, there's kind of like an expectation, you give it some leeway. But did Threads make a good enough first impression? And that's kind of what hit me, because like, as you said, the following thing was a little bit weird. Like that experience was a little bit odd. Not having a web client is a little bit weird. Even just not having a followers. Is it true that they don't even have like a following tab yet? They have like multiple tabs which show you like activity and stuff, but they still don't have like your followers or your following.
I think one of the I think one of the biggest issues is like the experience really was different if you were already an established Instagram user who were following a lot of people versus if you weren't. If you were an Instagram user, then you already had a lot of people to follow. Then your following feed, you're by default. I mean, now you have a following feed. Previously, it was just for you. You actually had stuff to go through. Whereas if you're a brand new Instagram user, you just throw onto Threads. Well, what are you going to do? You have nothing on your feed. You got to start following people, and there wasn't any good algorithmic feed to show like interesting content. So you kind of had to just go find users to subscribe to, and that was a really miserable experience.
I also found like I felt like I was an ML model having to like train itself, where I had to just start muting posts that showed me pictures of lunch or celebrities or sports or all the stuff that any algorithm in the world would know I never want to see any of. But I had to do that manually because I did not have the follower feed, right? So then I had to, find some of the people that I would follow and see who they're following, just to build up some amount of like content I might be interested in there instead. So there was a bit of a training ground for it to begin with before the feed got a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, and I see this as completely a business issue, because like what you have is you have a massive company like Meta who move very fast to get something out to take advantage of a business opportunity because of what was going on at Twitter. And in doing so, sacrifice functionality. If they sat and wait on it till be perfect, what is the phrase? What is the perfection? Is the
don't let perfect
movie?
Don't let,
yeah,
good
exactly.
be the enemy or whatever.
Yes, the enemy
was,
perfect. Yeah, no, an advisor to one of my startups gave great advice once, which is that if you're not embarrassed by your first release, you're doing it wrong. Right. Which I think is totally true. And what we normally see is we see an app come out into the world, give you a paradigm, or this is what we can do, and slowly add functionality as it slowly builds user base. And then by the time it gets critical mass, the features have matured and evolved. They've gotten user feedback. And here you just had not even a hockey stick. This is like a rocket launch, right? Where all of a sudden 100 million people are expecting the same functionality of a Twitter, which is hard to do. So I don't know. Anyway, but
I didn't think it's interesting because, again, like if it was something new, like, sorry, we're both referencing the BlackBerry movie because it's something novel and interesting. So there's no expectation. You know what I'm saying? So a first impression can be overcome with all the other Twitter X whatever alternates. Does Threads have a chance of getting over a lukewarm first impression?
It's a good question. I mean, with 100 million users, I think so. Even if half the people don't come, that's 50 million users. How many people with a web app would die for 50 million users?
Fair enough.
Right?
Yes, please.
So, all right, cool. Well, tell us what you think of Threads. Email us at contact@androidfaithful.com. We want to hear from you. And speaking of that, we did get some emails from you. And I know, Chet, you've got to run soon, so we want to get through these quickly so we can say goodbye. But our first email comes from Chuck in Thousand Oaks, California. And he says, I'm a longtime listener, 13 years of listening all about Android. You are the Android expert, or so I thought. I listened to your review of the Pixel tablet in episode 2. I was pretty disappointed. You had no idea. It's a pretty killer good dashboard. Really, it is. Watch this video from a YouTuber I follow. This guy's not known for his Android expertise, but he sure knows how to make the Pixel a great dashboard. And I went and checked out the YouTuber that he's talking. This is somebody named Smart Home Solver. And what he does is basically suggest installing a kiosk browser onto the Google tablet to make it the dashboard that we wish the Google Home app was. Which I get is an option that you could do, and didn't really bring that up, though, in my review of it because I was looking at the Pixel tablet out of the box. But, Chuck, I really do appreciate you keeping us to task, and thanks for the feedback. So, so go check out Smart Home Solver. He does a great video on the Google Pixel tablet as a smart home dashboard. So, all right, our next email, Win.
Yeah, so this is from John from Cincinnati. Hello, everyone. Thank you for bringing the pod back. Glad to be back. I have a bone to pick. Android makers should indeed give us SD card access. I use SD cards to hold all of my music I listen to when flying. It's important for travelers to be able to access media when offline. Luckily, I work for a company that manufactures rugged Android mobile devices, so I can have this all-important offline capability. Bring back the SD card readers. Thanks again, John from Cincinnati. And I guess this is in reference to last week where we had Max Weinbach on and talking about things that we may not need or do need. I guess everyone always has something that they want. And for sure, John wants SD card readers.
I love the SD card reader camp, by the way. They really want those back in their phones. And I get it. I don't know, but I moved on. So just like I moved on from the headphone jack. So, all right, great. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our show. Chet, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We really appreciate that. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can they find what you do?
There's that Threads thing. There are also other social media platforms. I also write a bunch of articles, technical and non, on Medium. You can find me there. ChetHaase.com is where I have info about the history book and the other stuff I do. And that's probably good enough.
Awesome.
Sure.
Well, we appreciate you joining us here.
We're big fans. For having me. Yeah. Always fun to have a conversation. Yeah.
And like you mentioned earlier, if people follow you, they're going to expect to get a lot of jokes on your social media feed. And I concur. You're probably the funniest Googler that I know, that I follow on social media.
Ooh, okay. I'm not sure if that is a low bar or a high one.
Well, intentionally
to be fair,
intentionally funny as well. I think that's
intentionally funny.
Intentionally funny is key. Yeah, there it is.
Your jokes land all the time for me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Well, speaking of that, Mishaal, where can folks find you?
If you want to follow dry Android news, just the news, then you can follow me at Mishaal Rahman. All my links are at this link right here. My handle is pretty much the same everywhere. Twitter/X, Threads, Instagram, Mastodon, etc.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Mishaal. And Huyen, where can people find you?
Yes, I'm an Android developer. I talk about Android development things like, large screens. Actually, I don't talk about large screens because, again, contractually obligated to be hesitant about it, at least for now. But you can find all my stuff on randomlytyping.com. And I am at Queen Code Monkey on places where you can, be an at something, social media networks like Threads X and other places like that.
Cool. And for me, I am RonXO all across the board. And I never pull up any of my stuff when we're doing the show, but I was very excited because I did have an experience of one of my Instagram posts of this band called Lincoln that I saw. Sorry, I'm not logged in. Went a little viral. I posted a video and it got picked up by Stereo Gum and some other sites out there. And I had people asking me permission to repost it and all that sort of stuff. So I went to a fun show this past weekend in Washington, D.C., saw bands play, and went viral in the process, which is pretty cool. So follow me at RonXO on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Mastodon. I think I'm still on Flickr. I might not be RonXO on Flickr, but I'm somewhere on there. There are pictures from 20 years ago on Flickr that are out there. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. This podcast publishes every Tuesday evening. You can go subscribe at androidfaithful.com. Of course, if you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/androidfaithful. We love our patrons, and please support us. You can get an ad-free version of the podcast, exclusive content, merch, all that fun stuff. As always, email us at contact at androidfaithful.com. We love to hear from you. We'll get your emails on the show. Until next time, we will see you next week on the wonderful world of Android Faithful. Thanks, everybody.